All right, everybody, welcome to the Really American podcast. I'm your adorable, affable host, Chip Franklin, here with you on this this crazy Monday. Happy MLK to everybody out there. And boy, you know, be a good day to go back and look at some of the things that King wrote and said on this day in this political climate. And that's kind of where we're going to start. We're going to start talking about politics, but in a funny way, in an unusual way. We're going to talk about politics and science and how the two of them can coexist. The process of science is trial and error, process of discovery and that's a difficult thing to nuance to people who want answers in the middle of a pandemic. And it's just not us. There's been a lot of people in a lot of places that have had this problem. This is a clip from the UK.
The coronavirus pandemic has put the spotlight on the often difficult relationship between science and politics. In the scientific world, researchers tread a slow and methodical path in the search for truth. But for some politicians, the rush to deliver quick and easy answers to complex questions has made scientific research into a political football. How does the virus spread? Do masks really protect their wearers? Who is most at risk from the pandemic? Researchers are still learning about the virus, trying to understand how it behaves and devising strategies to fight it. They need politicians to turn their findings into public policy. But that collaboration is often far from straightforward.
Well, as you can see, this is just not in the United States. It's a problem around the world. How to tell people difficult political narratives, and how to do that in such a way that that gets them to act in a way that's good for everyone. Joining us right now is a science writer from Bloomberg, and you've seen her everywhere else. Her podcast is well, I'm not finding Faye right now. This is not good. Hang on. Where is Faye? Well, that's not good. Oh, here it is. Maybe this is Faye. There she is. Sorry about that.
Hi.
Hello. This is Faye Flam, again, science writer from Bloomberg. Her podcast, Follow the Science, kicks ass. And if you want to start to go down this road, and it's a difficult road, it starts with this question: how did we screw this up? How did the American government and governments throughout the world, but mostly here in the United States, how did we manage to screw something up? And something will probably have 1 million dead Americans before all is said and done to this pandemic. Or was this totally unavoidable?
Some of it was unavoidable, but I don't think all of it. It was pretty clear that CDC was not up to the job, was not doing what we had hoped, which is to give people clear-cut information. People had to go to newspaper websites like the New York Times to find out things like how many cases there were. We had a very incoherent response from the CDC under Trump. It's gotten a little bit better, but it's still, I think, not what people expected. So that is one part of the problem.
Yeah, the CDC used to be, the head of the CDC used to be a position that you acquired through acumen and through going through the ranks, and then it was politicized. I think it was politicized under Obama, if I'm not mistaken. And then of course with Trump and again, obviously it's a difficult position to be in, but it's especially difficult if every day you think you're going to be on the streets, because the person that you answer to wants different answers other than what science is bringing. If the president had listened to the pandemic plan that had been passed down since W about masking and distancing, and enforce that. I've said in the beginning that I thought if Trump had made 500 million masks with the word hero on it, red mask with the word hero, make America safe again, or something along those lines, he'd be president today. I think he lost a political opportunity to own this. Would you agree?
Maybe. I think that, that you have to remember that there is still a lot of transmission that was going on in private settings. I think masks in public settings do some good. I'm not sure they would have ended the pandemic, or are ending the pandemic now that we've adopted them. So it's one of many things, including vaccines, which we got, though we haven't had the uptake we should, because people haven't been as well informed about why they should get vaccinated. There's a lot of misinformation about that. That's been a big problem. So there's a multitude of things that I've learned from talking to the experts over the last 2 years that could have been done better. And they include helping people who should be staying home from work because they are high risk, and they include just giving people the kind of information they need to know if they're high risk and know what they can do. So there's been I think a lack of kind of coherent information about even what settings are most risky, what people really should avoid. And at the beginning of the pandemic, people were washing their groceries and aging their mail and doing all kinds of things that were really not warranted by the situation.
But we didn't know.
Up to a point, I think that actually the experts did know that this was airborne, and that the surfaces were not as big of a deal. That I think that they knew there was a delay between when the experts knew and when people seemed to get the message out there.
Did China's first year differ greatly from us? Obviously they have controls over society. We don't. But I remember at one point, Wuhan, they were partying in the streets, and but then of course, it got back in. It doesn't take a lot to alter the dynamic. In the beginning, though, we didn't know. Well, I asked a question. I guess I should. Did China and did any other countries really perform better than us? We heard all these stories of Sweden and France, and of course, on the other side, we saw Italy and others, fall apart. Here, two years into this thing, did we all pretty much get the same grade?
Well, not exactly. I mean, New Zealand has done pretty well, but they have advantages that we don't have, including being a relatively small, they don't have these big cities. They're on an island. So I think they have had an easier time. We've saw Australia has pursued a similar strategy to New Zealand, and it hasn't been working very well recently. They have a lot of cases. And China and some Asian countries have had very few deaths compared to Western countries. There are things they have done early in the pandemic. I did some research on why there were so few deaths in Shanghai, even though it was a huge city, and it had to do with the way that people were actually taken out of their households if they were COVID positive and put in special quarantine hotels. So, they were really, the disease spreads through households, and so they were trying to prevent it from spreading from one family member to another, and when they did a lockdown, they really locked down. They didn't have all these essential workers out there getting the disease and spreading it through their families.
This is science writer Faye Flam, Chip Franklin on Really American Podcast. If you want to, it would help us a lot. Retweet this from your timeline, and so more people can see this and more people can get in. And if you got a question, I'll be putting some of the questions on the screen and some of the comments, and we can all look at those and speak to that. I mentioned at the beginning of the show that science is the process of discovery and error. It's the process of making mistakes, comparing mistakes, and then moving forward. That doesn't sound like, in the real world, in business and government, that kind of philosophy will get you fired. Nobody wants to hear about errors, right? How do you message something like this to a nation that is essentially still reading at a sixth grade level?
I still think, my job has been to write about very complex issues in science for the general public, for newspaper readers, and I've written about all kinds of things, particle physics. People are curious, and if you write in a certain way, people will tune in because they're curious about how the universe works and how the human body works and how viruses work. It's actually can be pretty interesting. And I think one of the keys is that you have to be completely transparent about uncertainty, because that's good scientists are transparent about their uncertainty. They have actually, systematic ways of quantifying their uncertainty with error bars and the use of statistics to actually see how uncertain they are. And I think it is important for science communicators to say, here's what people think based on some circumstantial evidence, and here's some experiments they're doing, and here's what we're starting to learn. But to really emphasize the uncertainty, and I think that would have helped to maybe get people to switch gears when they were washing their groceries, early, to thinking about the number of people in a building, to thinking about indoor transmission as opposed to outdoor. Some of the things that people were not doing, a lot of the things they should have been doing, and then doing a lot of things that weren't helping.
Yeah, it's so small that you can fit 20,000 viruses on the head of a pin. So it seems to me, on one hand, that's a lot of viruses, right? It's a lot. The flip side is outdoors. It would seem to me that they're so small that they would just be blown at. It wouldn't take anything at all to scatter them. But looking back on Trump's year with the pandemic and now Biden's year with the pandemic, I remember Trump telling Woodward, I always tried to play it down. How big a mistake was that?
I think it was a pretty bad mistake because in early February of 2020, I wrote a story about the fact that this was inevitably coming, going to be a big thing in the US, and that there was so much we needed to do to
What did you base that on?
On what scientists were seeing and how this disease was getting around. And it wasn't a sure thing, but we were at risk, and we knew we were at risk. We didn't know for sure, but there's a point where you say, okay, we're facing a risk that this pandemic is going to come here, and our hospitals are, are running very close to capacity as it is. We don't have a lot of extra PPE for the hospital workers. We need to start preparing ASAP. We need to start preparing people for the possibility that their place of work will be shut down, that their kids will be taken out of school, that we need to start getting people ready for this and thinking about how we'll navigate it. And it seemed like it was sort of ignored all through January and February and early March of 2020, when there could have been a lot done to set the stage and prepare. And I also think people lose faith in their politicians, even if they like Donald Trump, if they're not honest. If they admit, yeah, well, I tried to play down, I knew it would be bad. It's like people want to be leveled with.
Yeah, but I mean, I look at, I'm not so sure people always want the truth. The truth comes with it some responsibilities, and I think that's one of the things they liked about Trump. That Trump said it's like a virus, it's like the cold, it's just going to disappear. We're going to move through this. I mean, there were probably a lot of infectious disease specialists that agreed with him. I mean, I heard some idiots, I say idiots, but people that should have known better back in April and May of 2020, giving out really bad information. But you look at Biden, I mentioned Biden, where are all the masks right now? I mean, you look around the country, you look on any publication, and you can't find masks anywhere. How could they screw that up so bad?
That and the tests. I mean, by the time we get all our free tests.
What did I say?
Tests.
Yes, tests.
You said masks.
Masks. I'm sorry, I meant tests.
Well, and I think they are trying to get right now. There are lots of masks out. Not all of them work as well as.
Oh yeah.
But tests. Yeah, the tests are hard to get, and
right.
That is, some of it is the nature of the beast, that this Omicron thing kind of came out of left field and smacked us in the face. It was Thanksgiving. Didn't even.
Delta first, right? I mean, yes. Delta kind of reminded us that this thing isn't over.
Yes, and it was, and there have been some public health, some public health experts who have been advocating for rapid tests since late 2020, saying, these have a purpose, that if people are waiting in line and not getting a result from a testing site for a week, they're not getting useful information. They've already given the disease to a bunch of other people. Rapid tests might not be as accurate, but they have a place. And some of it was apparently they were being held to a higher standard by FDA for accuracy. They're not perfectly accurate, but the idea is that you can do a lot of harm reduction with these tests.
Yeah. Did you get a chance to read Michael Lewis's premonition yet?
I've read parts of it, and some of it's been excerpted on Bloomberg Opinion. He actually, a lot of his writing goes on Bloomberg Opinion as long pieces.
For those who don't know what I'm talking about, he actually had two books about the Trump presidency, and the first one kind of was the underpinnings for all this, was called The Fifth Risk.
The Fifth Risk was, I read some of that too. That was good.
Was essentially how the Trump administration did not take the job serious enough. In other words, did not fill key positions in everything from the Energy Department to Commerce to Health and Human Resources and everything, and how it had a cumulative effect over time, a progressive effect. But the idea of that, and the interesting thing about premonition, he really didn't beat up Trump a lot on that. It was more about local government cooperating with the federal government, the CDC's inability to move quickly, and then of course public health workers in California who had full autonomy to shut things down. Only person who could stop them was the governor. This gets me back to politics. I look at two politicians in my state, California, Gavin Newsom, who was seen in that famous when the whole state was supposed to be shut down. He was at a swanky restaurant without a mask, but he came out the next day and said, "I screwed up. I shouldn't have done that. I'm going to be better. I'll be a better leader for you." As opposed to London Breed, our mayor in San Francisco, who totally cluster bombed this thing when she came out and said, "What are you, the party police?" In the same situation, they caught her in a club without a mask. I mean, I don't really think we can trust politicians to handle a pandemic, left or right. They don't seem to have the balls to come out and say what really has to happen. And it makes me worry because 650,000 people died in 1918, 1919. Okay. We only had 100 million people. You extrapolate those numbers, we got 2 million dead here. right? More, maybe close to 2.5 million dead. And the monoclonal antibodies and all the stuff that we can use, it's great if you get it early, but if that thing gets into your lungs and starts moving through your, gets into your body, and you're not vaccinated, you are in big trouble. So I guess back to my point is it, should we have a health czar? Do we need somebody that can have that full autonomy to come out and to tell the president of the United States in front of the world, you're fucking this up?
Well, we did have, I guess Fauci would be the closest we have to that. Do you
Yeah,
think
he's
that?
got death threats, and Rand Paul wants him arrested now, and Ted Cruz wants him in prison. It's insane. I mean, let me put up a couple here. There's one in here I saw that. There's a lot of people that have. There's a lot going on today on this feed. Quit putting on the feed anything about except this. Everybody's talking about Malcolm X and well, we'll get back to that in a minute. But the responses to politics and science. How do you bring those two together? Because they're two disparate things.
They are.
I don't know how you do it.
Actually, the important thing I think is to separate them, because people get it all mixed up. They say, well, the science says we need to maximize, our efforts to prevent cases, and that's really partly a political decision. That, as I interviewed one Peter Sandman, he's a risk communication expert, and he said early on, science can tell you how risky something is, but it ends up being a political decision to decide how much risk is tolerable. And then we make those decisions all the time with things like speed limits and, worker safety rules. And so, you don't really want to mix up those things. You want to say, here's what the science says. And then people need to make decisions about how much risk is acceptable and what the trade-offs are. Do you minimize, COVID cases at the expense of things that might be very critical for people, such as educating our kids in public school?
I know. Obviously, Trump was so divisive and came along at the worst possible time for this pandemic. I can't help but believe that another politician on the right or left would have done better, just because he's a sociopath. I'm not. There's like 1,000.
And he had a negative effect on the American people, that we were so at each other, so divided and so angry at each other, and so polarized already. And then this came in and really drove a further wedge between people.
Obviously, with a mortality rate of about 1/3 of 1%, which it seems to be something along those lines. If that's the case, did we? Long COVID aside too, was our reaction appropriate, or was it not enough?
I've been asked that question a bunch of times, and I guess I would say it was both. That there were things we did that we didn't need to do, that were not just overkill, but weren't really helpful. And then there were things we should have done that we didn't do. In May of 2020, I interviewed an infectious disease doctor in Scotland, Muj Sevic, who's been very good on Twitter about giving people kind of practical advice. And we talked about the fact that, closing the beaches and the parks was a mistake, and that people were gathering in homes and getting the disease. And, they were getting the wrong idea about the disease, that it's sort of like nuclear fallout or something, and not a germ that you get from other people. And so I think we really, that wasn't overkill. Shutting down the beaches and parks, and we can talk about that. We really are crazy here in Rhode Island with that. Wasn't an overreaction. It was a misreaction. It may have actually caused more people to get sick, because then people were saying, okay, I guess if we can't have a picnic in the park, let's go meet in my basement. I think there was still a lot of transmission during the shutdown period in 2020, and I think people also are sort of fed up and confused, whatever side they come from, because we were sort of led all around with different things we were supposed to do. So I think it's hard to say whether it was overkill or underkill, because there were many things we also didn't do, including help, things where we would reach out and help people in difficult situations, homeless people, people who had jobs that they couldn't stay home from, even though they were high risk. We didn't we didn't do enough, I think, to help people, and we may have done
Yeah.
too much to tell people not to do things that were probably fine.
We threw $3 trillion at them.
We did that, and that was, and that probably saved some lives. There were some people that needed to stay home because they are at higher risk. We weren't as clear early on, I think, about the fact that we know people with certain types of health conditions are much more likely to end up hospitalized than others, and that people over a certain age, over 60, are much, much more likely to become sick enough to go to the hospital than younger people. That's been known from the beginning.
We're talking to Faye Flam, science writer for Bloomberg, and her podcast is called Follow the Science, and it's kick-ass. You should listen to it. Listen, how does the government, how should the government battle disinformation? Because disinformation killed tens of hundreds of thousands of people. I don't know how many, but a lot. I mean, can the government, or should the government invoke extraordinary measures to stop disinformation in a pandemic? I mean, because this wasn't as bad as it could have been, everything aside, and 1 million people being dead by the end of this year. It's pretty amazing. What I know you're not a policy expert, but you're a science writer and you do talk to people in those. What should we have done to stop disinformation?
Well, I think one of the things that we needed more of was good information, including the chance to debunk people that were spreading misinformation. I think when you just censor people, then you develop mistrust, and people don't understand why, and often the government doesn't actually know. They don't always know what's misinformation. It takes a while to figure that out.
We know, for example, when Joe Rogan is saying that ivermectin is making him better, and he's got a Spotify podcast that's heard by 10 million people. Okay. He's putting people's lives in danger. Okay. We can't nuance that. We can't come out and say, well, Joe's an American citizen, and he's got a really popular podcast. No, Joe, you're a danger to American citizens and people around the world with what you're saying. You and Aaron Rodgers and others that are in positions of where people could listen to you, and you screwed the pooch. What do we do? How do we stop that?
I mean, because how do you decide? You need people to come in and really look at whether there's any chance ivermectin works. There were some studies that kind of showed it might work, but when you actually looked at the whole body of work and you looked at the mechanism that it was by which it was supposed to work, it all falls apart. But it's not that obvious. And so I think they censored a lot of writing about questions about where the virus came from, but they really don't know, and they can't rule out a lab leak. So I don't think that was really misinformation. And I think that we needed to really, we needed a stronger effort to get the word out that ivermectin, it's a great drug for parasites, but it doesn't work against COVID. And that's known from both mechanistic. We know how it works and why you cannot kill the virus in the dose that we give to people with parasitic diseases. The dose is too small. So that's all well understood. The clinical trials have come in. The overwhelming evidence is that it doesn't work. And so
but then you got 15 million people tweeting and putting on Facebook and Instagram about how it does work. And that's a danger. But
where do you draw the line? How does the government decide? You really need people to go in and look.
Well, it wouldn't have been a problem 30 years ago, Faye. We didn't have social media.
We had newspapers and people like me that actually went out and said, oh, look, there's all this chatter about ivermectin. What is it? And then I would have a story on the front page that explained to people why ivermectin was not the right thing to take.
Do you think that, again, we're talking to Faye Flam, science writer from Bloomberg, her podcast is Follow the Science. Do you think the government should ever lie to the people to protect them?
No, I don't think that. I think that lies ultimately backfire.
How about this? How about not lie, but take incomplete science in order to, for example, like I know that when I turn on the stove, that if it's an electric, that in 5 minutes it's going to be hot. Okay. I know that it's going to be too hot to put your hand on. And I got to tell people, you got to get your hand off the stove because it's going to burn you. And they go, it's not hot now. I don't believe you. What do I do? I mean, again, we have this problem. We still have this problem, and we're going to have another pandemic. We had one in 58. People forget about, killed 150,000 people. We could get H1N1. We could get bird flu. We could find ourselves in a situation where not only do we need to talk to other countries, but we need people. We got half of the people in this country read on a 6th grade level. How do you talk to them without condescending?
I still think that that in the communication that it takes more work. I used to write for Science Magazine, and so I was writing for scientists, and then I wrote for the Philadelphia Inquirer, which is a big newspaper, and I had to work a lot harder to think about what people know, what they don't know, how to explain things in a way that's engaging and that they can follow. It takes a lot of work. It's a skill, and I think it can be done. And I think that you can do it in a way that's honest and transparent, because ultimately,
look at this one here.
Backfire.
Somebody just said, Paul says truth and transparency works. On the other hand, then you got this one that says, I have some pee you can drink if you run out. Right? I mean,
Okay.
To me, another one here, they don't care about the truth. They keep moving the focus. That could be either Trump or Biden, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know who that. Yeah, who's the they? That's kind of a common attitude, just seeing this sort of nebulous they out there. And I think that what we're actually seeing is a lot of lack of coordination between different public health officials and state and local and national government.
Here's one for you. Oh boy, more conspiracy BS with no proof or facts. Tim, this is Tim. I hate to call you out here, but if you're talking about our conversation is conspiracy and no proof or facts, this is the shit I'm talking about. People like this, okay, that come out and say you guys are just spreading lies and it's all conspiracy, and whether it's the Bill Gates put chips into I'll be honest with you, it's turned me hard and bitter the last 2 years. The level of not disinformation, it's a lie. It's a flat out lie by people who are afraid and lazy to look for the truth. And that's where I find myself now. I don't know what to say to people like Tim.
I don't understand who he's referring to or what he's referring to as conspiracy BS. Is he?
My experience on Twitter is that he's shooting at us.
But what conspiracy are we talking about? There's no.
Well,
there is no
a lot of them. First of all, there are a lot of them think that there's maybe 50,000 dead. That the rest of them were going to die anyway. You could go down the list here,
No, but those are the conspiracy theories. The conspiracy theories involve a conspiracy that somebody's hiding the truth. And we're not suggesting anyone's hiding the truth. We're saying people have been.
No, they're saying we are. They're saying we're
because you're saying that because I'm saying people could be more transparent than they've been.
Well, I read something recently. Said 1 out of 7 people get long COVID, right? And I tweeted that out, and I used to say that on my show in San Francisco, and I'd also come out and say there's really nobody in this country that's died directly from the virus. This is according to CDC. Somebody that was healthy that took the vaccine, not the virus. There's nobody that's died from the vaccine, getting the vaccine, that didn't have some other condition that led to, that they were sick before. A healthy person getting the vaccine hasn't died, according to the CDC. There's a like a small article on their website. So when you start talking about that, and people are talking about, it's altering their DNA, it's causing them to be infertile, it's causing birth defects. They propagate that, and you're a science writer, and you're well and calm, and your approach is exactly the way it should be. I'm not a science writer. I'm in the middle of all this, and I want to have a conversation with people, but how do you start a conversation with people that don't believe 1 + 1 is 2?
I think you just have to go through what people know and how they know it. How do we?
But again, half the country reads the same level the comics are written for. We're talking about people that don't have a 6th grade education. 138 million people can't read past a 6th grade level. How do we reach those people? Now I'm condescending.
Podcast. Yes, you talk to them then. I mean, then they maybe, some people have dyslexia. They have difficulty absorbing information through writing, and that's why I think it's good for us to branch out and talk to people as well. They can often understand the spoken word. Some people absorb information much better in writing than others.
All right. How about this? They should press charges, Stephanie says, against those who deliberately mislead the public and have caused death and destruction to our democracy. You know, that's to me, that's fire in the theater, man. What do you think? If somebody deliberately lies about COVID, and somebody that knows should know the truth, or it doesn't, hell, I don't care. If they're out lying and saying that you can do things that you can't do, and let's be a perfect example would be that you can't take hydroxychloroquine, you can't drink Clorox, this is a well, it's interesting too, because I say that, how do I prove somebody said something that actually causes harm?
Well, the hard thing is deliberate, because people have been trying to figure it out as they go along, and people have thought a lot of things were true that turned out not to be true. I wouldn't be surprised if Joe Rogan believes in his heart that he got better because he took ivermectin. He's wrong, but I don't know if he's
But you and I both
deliberately.
know I could have a bowl of Cheerios, and I could have a monoclonal antibody cocktail, and I could say, "God damn it, the Cheerios!
Yeah.
They're medicine. I'm from God."
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it is very difficult to point to people who have deliberately misled people, because there's so much people are learning as they go along. And as you said earlier, science is a process of finding out. This is a brand new type of disease that we have not experienced before, and people have learned as they go along. I think at times they were too slow to change, to switch gears, and too slow to tell us the evidence had mounted that this was airborne, that it was transmitting from person to person inside. But I don't know if the earlier reports were, they were based on what people thought at the time. Some of it, the press hypes things. It sounds good when you say, "Oh, a bicyclist going by, viruses fly off his head, and that might infect people." It's like, and people get all excited about that because it's such a shocking thing. What, you mean a bicyclist can make me sick by riding? And in a way,
What was the most shocking thing about the last 2 years for you?
well, I'm gonna have to think about that a little bit.
Let me throw you
You know,
mine. Mine was when I started talking to these infectious disease specialists, like in, I don't know, maybe June of 2020, and they were all marveling at the transmissibility of this thing and just how easily it was transmitted. And we still didn't know about a vaccine. And I remember talking to people, and they were saying, we still don't have a vaccine for HIV. This is not a done deal. And then, so, the transmissibility, but also that's on the bad side. On the good side, the remarkable science of mRNA and the vaccines themselves. What an incredible, that's kind of what pisses me off, really, is when people don't recognize just what an incredible contribution these healthcare workers and scientists made in saving lives. So when I see idiots like Joe Rogan or Ted Cruz or Rand Paul or anybody come out and say that that we got it all wrong, that this is, you should be able to throw out your mask and go to dinner, and that if you got the COVID, you don't need a booster. All these lies, they came from people who should have enough intelligence to know, not to say it. Those were my two things. What were the two things, or one or two things of the last 2 years that really got to you? Again, we're talking to Faye Flam, Bloomberg science writer and opinion editorialist. You can find her podcast at Follow the Science everywhere you get podcasts. What do you think?
well, yeah, on the good side, I would say, I was following the vaccine research as it went along, and I knew that this was not going to be like getting an HIV vaccine, because HIV is a disease that you can't clear with your own immune system, and this was a disease people could clear, and so a vaccine was likely to work against this disease in the same way that it does against measles and other diseases that people's immune systems can clear. I mean, I remember seeing when they first came out with the statistics that it was 95% effective, thinking it was an amazing thing, and that it happened faster. Fauci said it would take 18 months. It took less than that.
Yeah.
And we got the testing out. It was a real balancing act, because some people said we just should have unleashed the vaccines earlier, but you do have to be very, very careful about safety. And so I think you do want to go through the standard types of clinical trials to make sure that you don't have any bad side effects. Yeah, on the other side, so many things. I mean, hearing Trump just random crazy things,
Random bullshit. Random
random,
bullshit.
yeah,
Bullshit.
just not taking it seriously for when so many people were dying, just not getting on TV and saying, just letting random things sort of come out of his mouth. But also even on the local level, I told you, I was jogging in a park alone in Providence and got chased by the police, and they were
Were
clearing
you going
everybody
too
out.
fast?
Yes, that was
Yeah.
it. I was going too
Yeah.
fast. No, I mean, they really were trying to corral everybody to make us stay inside. And then we had the governor, who's now moved up in the world, on the radio saying, what you really should do is get takeout cocktails. We're now allowing takeout cocktails. That's what you should do, is stay in your houses and get drunk on takeout cocktails. Don't go outside in the sunshine and breathe fresh air,
All right. So last question along those lines. Did we learn anything?
Yeah, I think that we learned a lot.
What did we learn about ourselves, our government, our nature?
Yeah, Americans are better at the sort of high-tech science than we are at public health. We should have invested more in public health. We're pretty good at things like vaccine design and virology. We figured out what the virus was and how it worked and how to make a vaccine, and we've got some good antivirals. Public health, basic public health, always having a strong CDC, being prepared. So I think we learned that you can't neglect those things. Unfortunately, Donald Trump had sort of dismantled some of the infrastructure we had in place. So sometimes I think we needed to have hospitals that have more capacity, that are better prepared for an emergency. Having the sort of for-profit hospital system work the way it does to maximize profits wasn't good for a society that was vulnerable to pandemics. And so I hope we learn to think about public health in a different way, and also communication. I don't know, it's hard to navigate the world of social media. When we had mainstream media, I think you could get more
coherent. That's the Wild Wild West. There is no handling social media.
Yeah.
I mean that's buyer beware from step one, and that's the part that scares me moving forward, because that is a fuse that is headed for something we don't know what yet, and that could be catastrophic. But we'll have to tackle that some other time. The next time we have you on, I want to talk about this job you have with the New York Times, writing people's obituaries, mostly scientists, right?
Essentially, right, before they die. Yes,
before they die. That's
before they die.
Great. I love it.
Because you can't write a good obituary.
If you start writing mine, then I know I'm in trouble. Of course, I'm not a scientist, so it wouldn't matter. Faye Flam. All right, follow her, everybody. Follow her on Twitter. Get there and also listen to her podcast. Again, you can go to Stitcher or Apple, anywhere, and it's called Follow the Science. Faye Flam. That's Faye with an E, and the E is for especially or excellent or something like that. All right, great talking to you. You be well. All right, we'll catch you next time.
All right, thanks,
Thank
Chip.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And that was Faye Flam, who was our guest today. And I'm Chip Franklin. This is the Really American broadcast. And we do this a couple times a week. And if you got any kind of questions or ideas, you can always send them to me at chip@chipfranklin.com. That's chip@chipfranklin.com. Follow me on Twitter at Chip Franklin. And we'll see you next time. All right. You be safe. And again, follow us on Really American, on our YouTube, on Instagram, and also, of course, on Twitter. All right. We'll see you next time.